Welcome to Learning Lab, where we talk about the science of learning. Today, I'm super excited to welcome Dr. Miguel Gomez, who's an emergency medical resident doctor at the University of Connecticut. Miguel has spent over 20 years in the classroom as a student, including over 10 years in medical education. Miguel was born in Ecuador and moved here early in his life. Miguel has had an interesting journey studying business in undergrad and then transitioning to medicine after working in 911 emergency medical services in New York City. Welcome, Miguel.
Thanks, Aneesh. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you moved from Ecuador to the US when you were 6. What was the transition like educationally?
The transition, I would say, was a little difficult initially, a little bit of a culture shock. Back in Ecuador, I was a year ahead. I got started at school a little bit early because I was very hyperactive. But I would say that it was a little difficult learning the language here. I was fortunate enough to be in a neighborhood in New York where the public school system did have both only language classrooms, like individual classrooms. So they did Spanish, Russian. So I was in the Spanish only classrooms while learning English. And then as the years progressed, I was put in a bilingual class where they spoke both Spanish and English. And then before I finished elementary school, I was in English only classes. But overall, I would describe it as somewhat easy, believe it or not. My second grade education from Ecuador actually helped me throughout most of elementary school. And I would say that is both good, but also in the long run, kind of may not have helped me as much because I didn't develop good study habits.
Mm. So what were the
Mm.
differences, the key differences between the education system in Ecuador and the US?
I would say it was a lot more strict. I remember first grade, second grade, math was all done in graphing paper notebooks, so the little squared notebooks. Everything was done in pen, blue ink to show work, red ink to show answers. If there was too much whiteout on the pages, then your professors wouldn't accept the homework. All the writing was also done in script, so I remember just spending days on script notebooks, just copying J's and G's and all the different script letters. I also remember taking Italian and English, and I was actually very good at Italian at the time. It's very similar to Spanish, so that
Mm.
helped. Surprisingly, English was the language that I was actually having the most trouble with,
That's
or
interesting.
ironically.
Yeah. What about the penmanship? Like why that do you think? Why was that a key part of the classroom?
I think it was more of a discipline thing to just kind of work early on penmanship. It's important appearance. It's important to be disciplined. It's important to make sure that your work is neat and legible. So
And then, yeah, when you transitioned to the US, was it more of the culture shock, or the classroom setting that was different for you?
I would say a little bit of both. I remember in the classroom, I was surprised that everybody used pencil. That was like the big thing
Mm.
for me. I was like, I can use a pencil? What? I can erase?
That's
Yeah.
hilarious. So you then went on to college to study business, but eventually found your way to medicine. How did that happen?
At that point in my life, yes, I decided on business. I like the leadership aspect. I like to lead. I like to kind of help out and mentor when possible. And through my time in college, I was kind of lost. I transitioned through a couple different majors, including computer science, like everybody else did at that time. Even thought about being a history teacher, eventually settling down on business management. At that point in time, I was looking to work something more steady, like throughout the year, job wise, because I had a seasonal job in the summer. I ended up deciding to take an H&R Block course because I was like, I'm gonna go into business. It'd be good to know how to do taxes. It's all in the same field. When I had a relative recommend taking an EMT course, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, why not? I've never like at that point in time, I remember thinking about like an ambulance and being like thinking it's just like background. I know they exist, but you never really think about what goes on in them. And I was like, that would be interesting. So I took the course and it was a couple months and it was a great experience. I was very fortunate to then work as an EMT for a private company for a couple months before working 911 for a private hospital in Brooklyn, New York. And I did that for a couple of years. Around the time that I was graduating with my business degree, I really sat down and thought about what my future would look like and kind of what I wanted to do. And I realized that I wanted to be a doctor. I remember bringing in patients, trauma patients, cardiac arrest to our critical area at the hospital, and the doctors just getting to work and bring them in, give the report, and step back, and the resident and the attendings just commanded the room, and it left me in awe with their knowledge and what they were capable of doing. It made me realize that I wanted to do more for people as well and learn more. Um, so that kind of inspired me to go into medicine from
Mm,
that point on.
awesome. So it was like for you, it was like what the helping people. That's what inspired you.
That's a big component of it. Another component of it is actually I realized that I have ADHD while I was in college, while I was trying to like study. I would get easily distracted, and um, I realized I needed to be constantly stimulated. I needed
Mm,
to be in a field where I can continuously learn. There's always something new to do. There's always something new to learn. Like there's no plateau because once it becomes a bit monotonous, I lose interest, and then it becomes I can't be the best version of myself in a field like that. I'd peak and then I realized my productivity would decrease. I wouldn't hold my interest. So I found that medicine was a mix of everything. It kept me interested. Emergency medicine specifically was new patient every single time. You start broad, no idea what's coming in. You could have a sore throat, you could have a bad trauma, you could have a cardiac arrest, you could have some weird electrolyte abnormality. etc. So I realized that that would keep me stimulated and there was no monotony. There was no knowledge cap. There's always something new to learn. So
absolutely. So I love this because I obviously have a similar story of realizing my ADHD tendencies later on in life. What do you think, why do you think that it took you until college to realize that?
I would say part of that is going back to my elementary school days. I didn't really need to study for any of the exams. I didn't really need to do much all throughout elementary school and even through some of junior high school. It wasn't until I got to high school where I did struggle a bit. I tried to study, but again, um, ADHD is like a lifelong thing. So I found that the classes would bore me. I didn't really have that much interest, so I didn't really want to study. I did like the bare minimum. Like I got decent grades. I graduated, no problem. I passed all my state exams and everything, but I never really excelled. It wasn't until I decided to go for medicine that I realized like I actually don't know how to study in a way that helps me retain information. And that's something that I really focused on during my pre-med years.
Mm. So
Mhm.
you kind of yeah, you just took longer to realize it, and then once you did that help you? I guess did that help you in the
Oh,
classroom understanding, why you may be learning differently than those in your class in those in the rest of your class?
yeah, no, absolutely it did. Some people I realized they could hear things and just remember it, or they understood concepts a bit more easily. It's like the classroom was built for their type of learning, and I realized that it wasn't built for my type of learning, the way I
Mhm.
retain information. So I had to kind of find different ways to learn. The big one, I guess, for me was trying to pick up good study habits. So that was like what I emphasized in college. I became friends with people who did very well in class and I hung out with them. I tried to pick up on their study. How do they study? How do they understand the information? And then try to transition it in a way that I will understand and retain it. And I realized that one of the ways that I retain information is actually through pattern recognition. So like setting up arrows, color coding was another big one that I learned early on. So those things really helped me get my studying, build good study habits for pre-med so that I can take the MCAT, go to med school, and then eventually do well in med school.
That's awesome. So you had to figure out kind of what worked for you, right? What worked for your brain and what helped you, what helped the information retain and stick with you, right?
Correct. Yeah.
What was it like in medical school with ADHD?
I would say that it was honestly tough. The amount of information that we're expected to learn in such a short period of time is insane. Medicine over the last 20 years, 30 years the textbooks have doubled in size. So what I have to learn now doesn't compare or is significant, not doesn't compare, but it is significantly more than what you had to learn 30, 40 years ago. There's also the test. You take a test every 3 weeks.
Okay.
So you do lecture Monday through Friday, you study on the weekends, and then on the third week, that Friday or Monday, you're taking a test. And then it's on to the next section.
And so, what was the classroom setting like for you in medical school? And right, what will you change about it?
I would say the classroom setting, there's only so much that you can do, and a lot of things have already been tried. So in our lectures, they would have questions in the middle of the lecture that you had to click into through a link to answer the question, just to in attempt to see whether you were understanding the material, and if not, maybe you could focus on like the big topics at that point in time. Um, Also worked as attendance for them, which was good. Really, I wouldn't change much in the classroom. I think where it matters most is outside of the classroom. There's only so much that you can learn in a classroom during a lecture. You have an hour to learn them, for the lecture to give you the information, but you really don't learn it until you spend your time studying that evening, going over it. Depends on, like you said, what works best for you. So for me, it was pattern recognition. I had some friends who were big on Anki, which I didn't really know what it was until like after starting med school, but they had been proficient, so they liked using Anki to make cards. Other people liked videos. They preferred to rewrite notes, things like that. It's all really, you have to put in the work outside of the classroom to retain the information your own way.
Is the classroom worth it?
Yes, if the classroom setting is where you thrive and where you learn the best. If you're able to focus for that hour and you can really in that moment help you retain the information and learn it, then absolutely. Um, I would say for myself, not really. I found myself not really paying attention to class, the lectures. I would do my best, but after like 20 minutes, I was like, okay, you lost me. And then I would just go back and review something else. Later on, I would actually find myself just instead of paying attention to the lecture completely, I would tune in and sometimes I'd be doing something else on the side, similar to that topic.
So it just depends on who you are, right? What works for you. I think that's one of the things that we realized as we've been working on Learvo is, everyone's different. Everyone learns
Mhm.
differently. And so, can definitely also relate to you in the way the classroom works for you, because I felt the same way about how the lectures, even if I was interested in it, I still had a hard time holding my attention, and something would happen in the classroom and my attention would turn to that, right? And so just little
Yeah.
things like that can really affect your attention, and then you just miss out on, that content, right? I think I'm not jealous of those that went to school during COVID, but at the same time, I sometimes am, because they got to
Mhm.
pause, they got to rewind, they got to fast forward through their
Mhm.
lectures, and that's just not something that, when we were going to school, we had the ability to do. Did you feel that other people were similar to you in terms of how they learned when you were going
Oh
through
yeah,
medical school?
absolutely. I ended up making a group of friends who all studied in a similar fashion, not the exact same, but we all kind of knew that we had short attention spans,
Hmm.
and we kind of banded together and would study together, ask each other questions. We would be like, all right, we're studying together. We're doing 4 hours. The first hour, silent studying. Nobody say nothing, just do what you can, focus. And then after that, it was like open study. Okay, so what did you guys learn? What are you having trouble remembering? This is how I remembered this. This is an acronym that upperclassman told me to remember this toxidrome or like this these connection to this disease. You kind of find your people and you kind of just figure it out.
I love that. I love that. So for our listeners, find the people that learn in similar ways to you and
Mhm.
share with each other the tactics that work for you. And it'll probably work for, your friend or classmate that learns similarly to you or has similar learning differences to you.
Absolutely. That sums it up perfectly.
All right, if you had to pick two or three learning methods or tactics that really made a difference for you, what would those be?
The biggest tactics that made a difference for me studying would be the pattern recognition. So realizing that I like patterns. I'll split things up into groups and be like, okay, so the first three diseases in this group of diseases, the arrows face this way. So remember, like up, up, like if you have four columns, it would be middle, up, up, and then the bottom one up. So then everything else is down. And then go further down, and it's like up in the third column, up in the fourth column, up in the third column, and then everything else down. And that's how I remembered like the different types of shock, for example. That's what I used. I also like color coding or color coordinating. I would do things, for example, values that were elevated were green, values that were low were red. My bacterias, for example, gram positive and gram negative. Gram negative stain is more pinkish, gram positive is purple. So all my bacteria, I would write them out in the color that they're associated with. That way, just passively learning by seeing it, I'll naturally associate it. So Staph aureus, gram negative, always wrote it in purple to the point where I didn't need to question. I was like, oh yeah, I always write that one in purple, so I know it's a gram positive, as opposed to something else like Neisseria, like gonorrhea, which is a gram negative.
So would you say you're more of a visual learner then?
Yes,
Okay. When do you think you figured that out?
I would say like a pre-med.
Okay.
I learned that. I also found that making stories, unique stories for myself, helped me retain information. An example is sarcoidosis, right? It's a restrictive lung disease. And I was having trouble with that question. I was always getting it wrong, remembering kind of what it was associated with till I came up with a story, right? They always ask like, what's the hypersensitivity reaction? What lab values are associated with it? What is the histological finding? So I came up with a story in my head that incorporated everything. Like it was sarcoidosis 4, for example, meaning it's sarcoidosis is a type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. I included something about an ACE for a sport. So the ACE would be in angiotensin converting enzyme. So that would be elevated. The athlete needed to be strong, so they gave him lots of calcium, hypercalcemia. He would be try to lift things that were like the size of asteroids, and that would help me remember asteroid bodies, which was the histological finding. So after that, I found myself like retaining information very well. So I did that for a couple different topics that I had issues with.
Awesome. That's another great tactic for our listeners. Create a story that relates to you, right? Relates to your interests and what works for your brain and help you create almost mnemonics that way.
Yeah.
If you were to design a learning platform tailored towards you, like it was completely personalized to just what you need and how you learn, what would be a few other core features that it would have?
Ooh, okay. Well, if we're using today's technology, I definitely incorporate AI to help facilitate things. A mnemonic maker would be great. A story maker as well. So if it could take both and make a story out of a mnemonic to make it easy to remember, that's great. Color coding. I would try to make it as versatile with as many variables as possible so that each unique learner can tailor it to like their style of learning. So if you like flashcards, there's a flashcard option there. If you like to draw things out, there's a draw board on there so you can just draw things out. If you like to make charts and diagrams, then you can do that as well, so on and so forth. I think that's probably what I would do and have AI assist. So like make a chart of and then 5 rows or whatever, and then you fill it in as needed.
Miguel, you've had quite the transition between what you wanted to do in life, right? You said you mentioned you bounced around a couple times in college, figuring out what you're trying to do. You eventually landed in medicine and have gone to medical school and now a resident. What advice to our listeners would you give about how to find their specialty, either within medicine or work life in general? What is some tactical advice that they can use if they are bouncing around similar to you did during school, trying to figure out what they want to do? What advice would you give to them?
I would say try a bunch of different things initially. Don't don't turn anything down. Opportunities are rare, so if you have an opportunity to get experience in the field, go for it. Early on in my life, I told my mom I was never going to be a doctor. It was too hard. She was like at 19, 20, and she was like, you should try to be a doctor, go for medical school. And I was like, no way, that's too hard, that's too long. I could never do it. I'm not smart enough, et cetera, et cetera. And yet here I am. Figure out what your interests are and where you excel. If you're somebody who likes quick bursts of action, information. You like meeting people and talking to people, and you like doing working with your hands within medicine. I would say that you'd be fit for emergency medicine or surgery. If you are somebody who likes to take a deep dive into history, or you're very meticulous about making sure you have all the right information, then within medicine, it could be internal medicine, or outside of medicine, you could be an accountant, for example. Really just find what personality type you have and what in that specific field applies to your personality. And then anything worthwhile is going to be difficult. Anything worthwhile is going to take time, right? So just put your head down, do what you got to do. The best advice that I can give anybody for anything that will take years to achieve is the time is going to pass by anyways at the same rate. So it doesn't matter whether it's going to take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You're still going to age those 5, 10, 15 years at the same rate, whether you go for that career or, follow down that path or not, right? So if it's really something you want to do, just do it and no backup plans.
Can you
Just do
explain
what you gotta do.
the no backups plan part?
Sure. I find that if you have a backup plan, you're less likely to feel, I guess, that I don't want to say desperation, but that drive to do what you need to do. Again, I can only speak from my own personal experiences, but going back to pre-med, I felt that desperation for the first time in my life where every test mattered. There was no backup plan. I had one shot to do well and, get my GPA up to be competitive for medical school, and every test mattered. So it was literally like, okay, you got to get an 85, you got to get a 90 on your exam. You can't fail this exam, or there goes med school. There is no backup plan. It's do or die. And I feel that like that stress, that extra pressure really helped push me to achieving, my dreams and being where I am today.
Miguel, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. This was not only inspirational, but very informative as well, and I know our listeners will get a lot from this. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this conversation, consider sharing with someone who might be navigating ADHD or could benefit from hearing Miguel's story. And stay tuned for more episodes.